The grand chamber of the binary concordance sat suspended within the event horizon of a stabilized singularity, a monument to the uneasy peace that held the galaxy in a suffocating grip. Here, time dilated and stretched, allowing the proceedings to carry a weight that felt physically crushing to any species evolved on a standard planetary surface. The architecture was a testament to the two opposing philosophies that ruled the known sectors. The Crimson Synod, whose structures were jagged, forged from red dwarf stellar matter and blood iron, representing the chaotic necessity of war and evolution through conflict. And the Nova Judges, whose side of the chamber was composed of crystalline light, cold fusion containment fields, and absolute, terrified order. Between them lay the void floor, an expanse of absolute nothingness bridged only by a narrow walkway of hard light where the accused would stand. Today, the air, recycled through filters that had tasted the breath of empires long dead, was thick with a tension that tasted of ozone and copper. The galaxy was not at war, yet the silence in the room was louder than the bombardment of 1,000 worlds. The subject of this emergency convocation was not a fleet, nor a fallen empire, nor a biological plague. It was a single vessel, a vessel belonging to the youngest, most enigmatic protectorate species inducted into the concordance, humanity. High Adjudicator Vrexel of the Nova Judges sat upon his throne of suspended photons, his multifaceted eyes twitching in a display of microscopic anxiety that his species usually suppressed with chemical dampenings. He was a creature of logic and light, tall and slender, his skin translucent enough to show the pulsing blue veins of coolant blood beneath. Opposite him, lounging on a throne of black iron and red velvet, was Warlord Kalen of the Crimson Synod. Kalen was a beast of muscle and scars, his carapace adorned with the trophies of conquered systems, his breathing audible as a wet, grinding rasp. They hated each other with the intensity of colliding stars, yet today, their gazes were locked not in combat, but in shared confusion. Between them floated a holographic projection of the incident. It was a grainy, high-radiation recording taken from the sensory buoy of a border world in the Vale sector. The image showed a standard Crimson Purge fleet, massive, jagged dreadnoughts designed to glass the surface of a rebellious moon. And blocking their path, dwarfed by the sheer tonnage of the Crimson destroyers, sat the Solstice Horizon. It was a human-heavy cruiser, a blocky, utilitarian thing of gray hull plating and visible thrusters, lacking the elegance of the Nova ships or the terrifying majesty of the Crimson Fleet. It simply sat there, its shields cycling in a calm, rhythmic pulse, its weapons powered down, refusing to move. "They did not fire," Warlord Kalen rumbled, his voice vibrating through the floor plates, causing the dust of the chamber to dance. "They did not power their weapons. They did not raise their electronic warfare suites. They simply positioned themselves between the orbital bombardment cannons and the target population. They absorbed the first salvo with their shields, and when ordered to move by my fleet master, they sent a message consisting of 4 words. The warlord tapped a claw on his armrest, and the audio played through the chamber. It was a human voice, calm, resonant, devoid of the trembling fear that should have been present in the face of annihilation. "We decline your trajectory." Vrexel shifted on his throne of light, his mandibles clicking softly. "Logic dictates that a protectorate vessel obeys the command of the senior patrons. The Crimson Synod holds jurisdiction over the Vale sector. The Nova Judges hold jurisdiction over the core. The humans are mercenaries, engineers, logistical support. They are not policymakers. For a single ship to deny the trajectory of a purge fleet is not merely insubordination. It is a calculation error of such magnitude that it suggests a defect in their species' cognitive processing." The hologram shifted, zooming in on the human ship. It had taken heavy damage. The first salvo from the Crimson Fleet had scorched its port armor, exposing the rib-like structure of its internal bulkheads. Fires vented into the vacuum, quickly snuffed out by emergency seals, yet it had not moved. It had held the line for 3 standard hours, absorbing punishment that should have vaporized a vessel of its class, until the Crimson Fleet, confused and unwilling to start an interspecies war with the humans without Synod approval, had ceased fire. The human ship remained there still, a broken, burning shield over a world of primitives who didn't even know they were being saved. "It is not a defect," Kalen growled, leaning forward, his scars stretching. "I have studied war for 400 cycles. I know cowardice, I know bravery, and I know insanity. This was none of those." When the fleet master threatened to board them and execute the crew, the human captain opened a channel. He did not beg. He did not cite regulations. He read poetry. He read an ancient text about the quality of mercy. It was unsettling, It felt like a weapon, though I cannot discern the mechanism of injury. The doors to the grand chamber began to rumble, a deep, tectonic sound that signaled the arrival of the accused. The massive blast doors, capable of withstanding a tactical nuclear detonation, slowly ground open. A mist of cryovapor rolled in from the docking bay corridor, swirling around the ankles of the hundreds of minor delegates watching from the shadowed alcoves. The atmosphere shifted. Every sensor in the room spiked. The delegates expected a squad of heavily armed Marines, or perhaps a terrified diplomat in ceremonial robes begging for forgiveness. Instead, a single figure walked out of the mist. He was unarmored, wearing a simple dress uniform of charcoal gray, the fabric crisp and unadorned save for a small silver pin on the collar. He was an older human, his hair the color of steel wool, his face lined with the deep grooves of a life spent in the void. He walked with a cane, not out of frailty, but with a rhythmic, purposeful cadence, click, step, that echoed through the silent hall. He did not look at the thousands of alien eyes staring down at him. He looked straight ahead, toward the empty podium floating in the center of the void floor. This was Captain Elias Thorne of the Solstice Horizon. He reached the podium and placed his hands upon it. He did not bow to the Nova Judge. He did not salute the Crimson Warlord. He simply stood there, waiting, his heartbeat slow and steady, a biological rhythm of terrifying calmness that was broadcast on the medical scanners for all to see. Vrexel looked down from his high seat, feeling a ripple of irritation in his neural mesh. "Captain Elias Thorne," the High Adjudicator announced, his voice amplified to fill the cavernous space. "You stand accused of high treason against the Concordance, obstruction of a sanctioned purge, and the violation of the hierarchy of species. You placed your vessel in the path of the Crimson Synod's justice, shielding a planet designated for sterilization due to biological contamination. Your ship is crippled. Your crew is wounded. You are alone in a hostile system. Do you understand the gravity of your position?" Thorne looked up, his eyes a dark, piercing brown that seemed to absorb the light of the chamber rather than reflect it. When he spoke, his voice was not loud, yet it carried to the furthest reaches of the hall without the need for shouting. "I understand gravity, High Adjudicator. It is the force that binds us to our worlds, and the force we defy every time we launch a ship. I understand my position perfectly. I am standing between two empires that have forgotten the definition of life, defending those who have no voice to speak for themselves." Kalen let out a barking laugh, a harsh sound like grinding metal. "Sentimental drivel. The planet was infected with a presentient fungal pathogen. The protocol is clear. Burn the biosphere to save the sector. It is the math of survival. You humans were hired to haul cargo and repair jump gates because you are supposed to be logical, efficient. When did you decide you were judges?" "We are not judges," Thorne replied, his tone even, his gaze shifting to the Crimson Warlord. "We are witnesses, and the protocol you cite is outdated by 3,000 years. The fungal pathogen on that world is not a plague. It is a symbiotic network, a primitive neural mesh. We scanned it. We listened to it. It was singing, Warlord. The planet wasn't sick. It was waking up. To glass it would not be sterilization. It would be murder of a nascent hive mind intelligence. The Solstice Horizon did not rebel against the law. We rebelled against ignorance." A murmur ran through the gallery. The minor races, often crushed under the heel of the binary powers, exchanged glances. A human ship had scanned a target before firing. Such a thing was unheard of. The Concordance operated on absolute edicts. Crimson commanded, Nova adjudicated, and the rest obeyed. The idea of independent verification was dangerous. It was a spark in a room filled with volatile gas. Vrexel's lights dimmed, his color shifting to a harsh, judicial violet. "You claim superior knowledge? You whose species has barely mastered zero-point energy? You dare to lecture the Nova judges on the nature of intelligence? We have cataloged the stars since your ancestors were banging rocks together in caves. Your arrogance is staggering, human. You speak of singing fungi while you stand on the precipice of execution. We will strip your vessel. We will dissect your crew to find the defect that allows such insubordination. And then we will glass the planet ourselves, just to prove the immutability of the decree." Thorne did not fly. "NCH, he did not plead. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, antiquated device, a mechanical pocket watch. He clicked it open, checked the time, and snapped it shut. The click echoed like a gunshot. "You will do none of those things," Thorne said softly. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a predator realizing it has misjudged the prey. "Because while you were debating my fate and while you were posturing on your thrones, the Solstice Horizon was not just sitting idle. You see, when we intercepted the Purge fleet, we didn't just run shields. We ran a deep spectrum analysis of your targeting arrays. We found a backdoor in your fire control software. A legacy code left over from when the Nova and Crimson were one people, before your civil war split you into logic and rage. The two leaders froze. The history of the Great Schism was forbidden knowledge. We found that your systems are linked, Thorn continued, taking a step away from the podium, walking along the edge of the abyss. The Crimson weapons cannot fire if the Nova navigational computers designate the target as friendly. And the Nova shields cannot activate if the Crimson sensors detect a biological threat within the ship. Kalen stood up, his massive hands gripping the arms of his throne, crushing the black iron. You hacked the Concordance grid? That is an act of war. Thorn stopped and turned to face the giant. No, Warlord, we didn't hack it. We read the manual. We read the old code that you forgot. We simply broadcast a signal, a continuous loop of the original armistice agreement that founded this concordance. Your ship's computers recognized it. They recognized the authority of the ancient laws you claim to uphold but constantly violate. Right now, every ship in the Crimson Fleet orbiting that planet is locked down. They cannot fire. They cannot move. They are currently listening to a history lesson on loop. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted, sensors flashed, and guards moved to intercept, but Vrexel raised a hand of blinding white light, silencing them. He stared at the human, his alien mind racing to comprehend the implications. This small, soft creature had disabled a fleet not with a virus or a bomb, but with the truth of their own history. It was a level of strategic asymmetry that the Nova judges had never calculated. You hold a fleet hostage, Vrexel hissed. But you are here. You are in our power. We can vaporize you where you stand. You could, Thorn agreed, leaning on his cane. But you won't, because the Solstice Horizon is not the only human ship. You mistake our lack of aggression for a lack of capability. You see us as haulers and mechanics. You forget that before we were starfarers, we were the most efficient persistence hunters on our home world. We do not fight to dominate. We fight to endure. And right now, there are 12,000 human vessels in the trade lanes. Haulers, passenger liners, mining rigs. If I do not send a code every hour, they will all stop. The galactic economy, which relies on human logistics for 80% of its food and fuel transport, will freeze. No war, no shots fired, just silence. You will starve in your citadels within a month. The gravity of the threat settled over the room like a physical weight. It was the ultimate checkmate. The humans had integrated themselves so deeply into the mundane, invisible workings of the Empire that they had become its blood. And now the blood was threatening to stop flowing. Kalen sat back down, a low growl rumbling in his throat, but it was a sound of respect, not just anger. The human option, Kalen muttered. We thought you were weak because you did not build dreadnoughts. We did not see that you turned the logistics network into a dreadnought. We prefer the term civil disobedience, Thorn said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. But we are not here to threaten you. We are here to warn you. The rebellion of the Solstice Horizon was necessary not just to save a planet, but to get your attention. We needed you to look at the Veil sector, really look at it. Thorn tapped the podium, and the hologram changed. The image of the human ship and the Crimson Fleet vanished, replaced by a star map of the galactic rim. It was a complex web of lights, but there was a dark patch, a ragged hole in the star field where no light shone. The Nova judges look inward, obsessed with law within the core. The Crimson Synod looks outward, but only for conquest. Neither of you noticed that the stars in the halo cluster are going out. The chamber grew cold. The holographic map zoomed in. It wasn't just a lack of data, the stars were gone, vanished. We detected it 6 months ago, Thorn explained, his voice losing its defiant edge and taking on a tone of grim seriousness. We thought it was a sensor glitch. We sent probes, they didn't come back. Then we sent a scout ship. It returned, but the crew W. As gone, the ship was intact, but there was no organic matter left on board, just dust, and a recording. Thorn pressed a button. A sound filled the chamber, a low, discordant thrumming like the sound of insects scratching against the hull of a ship, but amplified 1 billion times. It was a sound that triggered a primal fear in every species present, a genetic memory of the dark beneath the bed, the predator in the cave. The planet we saved, Thorn said, pointing to the location on the map. The one with the singing fungus? The song was a warning. The planetary intelligence was screaming. It was acting as a buoy, broadcasting the approach of something that eats energy, something that eats light. We call them the Hollow Ones. They are moving toward the core, and the Concordance is busy arguing about jurisdiction and glassing potential allies. Vrexel and Kalen looked at the map, then at each other. The rivalry, the ancient hatred, seemed to shrink in the face of the encroaching dark. The silence in the room was no longer political, it was existential. You stopped the purge, Vrexel said slowly, to preserve the warning system. We stopped the purge, Thorn corrected, because it was the right thing to do. The strategic advantage was a bonus. That is the human philosophy you fail to grasp. Ethics is not a weakness, it is the ultimate survival strategy. By saving that world, we gained the data we needed to understand the enemy. If you had glassed it, the Hollow Ones would be upon us before we knew they existed. Kalen leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And now, you have paralyzed my fleet. You have humiliated the judges. You have revealed a threat we are unprepared for. What is your proposal, human? Do you intend to lead the Concordance? Do you claim the mantle of command? Thorn shook his head. We don't want to rule, we want to live. We want our children to live. We are engineers, remember. We fix things. The Concordance is broken. You have separated the sword from the shield. The Crimson fights without logic. The Nova judges without compassion. That ends today. The Solstice Horizon has already transmitted the patch for your fire control systems. Your fleet is free. The trade lanes remain open. But in exchange, we require a unified command. A unified command? Vrexel asked, his voice trembling slightly. Led by whom? Led by no one, Thorn said. Led by the necessity of survival, we will provide the logistics and the intelligence. The Nova judges will provide the coordination and the shield technology. The Crimson Synod will provide the firepower. We are going to the Halo cluster. We are going to reignite the stars, or we are going to die in the dark together. The atmosphere in the room shifted from fear to a strange, vibrant energy. It was the feeling of a paradigm shattering. The humans, the quiet servants of the galaxy, had just kicked down the door and rearranged the furniture. They had exposed the petty squabbles of the great powers for what they were, children fighting over toys while the house was burning down. Kalen stood up, towering over the assembly. He looked at the holographic void on the map, then down at the small, fragile human. The Crimson Synod acknowledges the threat. He turned to Vrexel and the judges. Vrexel's lights pulsed rapidly, calculating probabilities, weighing outcomes. Finally, he settled on a steady, brilliant white. The Nova judges acknowledge the logic of the human proposal. The execution of Captain Thorn is stayed indefinitely. Thorn nodded once, a sharp, efficient motion. Good. Then I suggest we adjourn. My ship requires repairs, and we have a war to plan. The Solstice Horizon will be ready to depart in 48 hours. I expect the fleet to be ready to join us. He turned and began the long walk back across the void floor. Click, step, click, step. The sound was different now. It wasn't the walk of a defendant. It was the metronome of a new era. As he reached the massive blast doors, he paused and looked back at the two most powerful beings in the galaxy, frozen in their opulent thrones. One more thing, Thorn called out, his voice echoing through the chamber. The fungal intelligence on the planet, it has a name. It calls itself the Deep Listener. It asked me to convey a message to you. Speak it, Kalen commanded. Thorn smiled, a grim, weary expression. It said, the light is loudest before it goes out. Make sure you are worth the noise. With that, the human captain exited the chamber, leaving the masters of the galaxy to stare into the abyss he had revealed, realizing for the first time that the small, soft creatures they had underestimated were the only things standing between them and the end of all things. The corridor outside the grand chamber was cool, the air scrubbed of the heavy incense and ozone of the courtroom. Commander Sarah Vance was waiting for him, leaning against the bulkhead, her arms crossed. She saw Th. Eway Thorn leaned heavily on his cane once the doors sealed behind him, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the chronic pain of old wounds and the crushing fatigue of the diplomatic performance. She stepped forward and offered him a steadying arm, which he took without protest. Did they buy it? She asked quietly, her eyes scanning the corridor for listening devices. They bought the truth, Thorn rasped, his voice rougher now. Because they had no choice. Fear is a powerful motivator, Sarah, but fear of the unknown is stronger than fear of losing face. We bought the galaxy some time. The Solstice is patched up, Vance reported as they walked toward the docking bay. Chief Engineer Chen says the structural integrity is at 80%. We can jump, but if we get into a heavy engagement, the port nacelle might shear off. It'll have to hold, Thorn said. We aren't going there to dogfight, we're going there to light a fire. They reached the airlock of their shuttle. The transition from the station's gravity to the shuttle's artificial field was jarring. Thorn settled into the pilot's seat, bypassing the automated protocols to initiate the launch sequence himself. He needed the tactile feedback, the vibration of the thrusters, to ground himself. As the shuttle detached and drifted away from the massive station, he looked out at the view. The Crimson Fleet was there, a jagged sea of red metal. The Nova ships were there, sleek and crystalline. And in the middle of them all, looking battered and small, was the Solstice Horizon. It wasn't a warship, not really. It was a retrofitted heavy explorer, armed with more sensor probes than missiles. But right now, it looked like the most dangerous thing in the sky. As they approached their ship, Thorne's comms unit buzzed. It was a secure channel, encrypted with a rolling cipher that only human ships used. "Captain," the voice of Admiral Holloway from Earth Command came through, clear and crisp. "We monitored the proceedings. You played a dangerous game, Elias, threatening to shut down the logistics network. The trade guilds are having a heart attack." "It wasn't a bluff, Admiral," Thorne said, docking the shuttle. "If they had fired on us, the network would have gone dark. The captains all knew the plan. If the solstice burns, the engines stop." "I know," Holloway sighed. "That's what scares me. We're committed now. You've effectively appointed humanity as the galaxy's conscience. That's a heavy burden." "Someone had to carry it," Thorne said, limping onto the bridge of his ship. The crew snapped to attention, men and women of various ethnicities, tired, bandaged, but looking at him with a fierceness that burned. They were the crew that had stared down a purge fleet. They were the crew that had said no when the entire universe said obey. "Admiral," Thorne continued, sinking into his command chair, "the Hollow Ones are real. The data from the listener confirmed it. They aren't just eating stars. They're rewriting the laws of physics in the sectors they consume. Entropy is accelerating. If we don't stop them at the Halo cluster, the core worlds will be dust in a century." "We are mobilizing," Holloway confirmed. "The Crimson and Nova fleets are hailing us. They're asking for coordinates. They're asking for orders, Elias. They're waiting on you." Thorne looked at the main view screen. The stars were vast and cold, indifferent to the struggles of the creatures that sailed between them. But humanity had never accepted indifference. They had looked at the cold and built fire. They had looked at the distance and built wings. And now they looked at the end of the world and built a bridge. "Plot a course for the Halo cluster," Thorne ordered, his voice strengthening. "Maximum warp. Transmit the coordinates to the Allied fleet. Tell them to form up in a defensive wedge behind us." "Behind us, sir?" the helmsman asked. "We're a light cruiser. They have dreadnoughts." "We're the guides," Thorne said. "We go first. We light the way. That's the job." The engines of the Solstice Horizon flared, turning from a dull amber to a brilliant, blinding white. The ship pivoted, turning its back on the safety of the station, pointing its nose toward the dark patch in the sky where the stars were dying. Behind it, slowly, clumsily, the massive leviathans of the Crimson Synod and the elegant spires of the Nova judges began to turn. They fell into formation, 1,000 ships, 10,000 ships, moving in sync for the first time in 10 millennia. Thorne watched the sensors as the fleet assembled. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess of conflicting aesthetics and technologies, bound together by a single, fragile thread of human stubbornness. He touched the pocket watch in his pocket again. "Time to go," he whispered. "Engage," he said aloud. The stars stretched into lines of light. The solstice horizon punched a hole in the fabric of space, and the galaxy followed. He jumped to the Halo cluster, took 3 weeks of subjective time. Inside the slipstream, the laws of politics dissolved, replaced by the laws of survival. The human engineers spent the time transmitting data packages to the alien fleets, instructions on how to modify their shields to withstand the entropic dampening fields of the Hollow Ones, tactical algorithms for fighting in total darkness, and perhaps most importantly, cultural exchange files. For the first time, Crimson warriors were reading human philosophy, trying to understand the mindset of a species that would shield a fungus with a starship. Nova judges were listening to human music, finding strange, chaotic patterns in the jazz and classical symphonies that defied their binary logic, but resonated with their crystalline cores. When the fleet dropped out of warp, the silence was deafening. They had arrived at the edge of the abyss. Before them lay the Verdant system, or what was left of it. The star was dim, a sickly brown dwarf being drained of its coronal mass by invisible tendrils of dark energy. The planets were cold, their atmospheres frozen snow, and hovering in the void were the Hollow Ones. They were not ships, they were absences, geometric shapes of absolute blackness that distorted the light around them. They were vast, some larger than moons, and they pulsed with a negative pressure that made the hulls of the Allied fleet groan. "Sensor readings are wrong," the ops officer called out, his voice tight. I'm reading negative energy spikes. They're trying to unravel our molecular bonds. Shields are holding but degrading fast, 0.4% per second. They know we're here, Thorne said. They don't care, Vance replied. To them, we're just more fuel. Open a channel to the fleet, Thorne ordered. All ships, this is Solstice. The enemy adapts to energy weapons. If you fire plasma, they will eat it and grow stronger. You must use kinetic rounds. Mass drivers, railguns, missiles with solid warheads. Physical impact is the only thing that disrupts their cohesion. Acknowledged, came the voice of Warlord Kalen. The Crimson Synod thirsts for the crunch of impact. Logic confirms, Vrexel added. Kinetic batteries online. Attack pattern Delta 9, Thorne commanded. Drive a wedge. We need to get to the star. The listener said there's a resonance frequency in the stellar core. If we can trigger a solar flare, a coronal mass ejection of a specific harmonic, it will disrupt their feeding mechanism. It will starve them. We're going to punch a sun, Vance asked, gripping the console. We're going to give it indigestion, Thorne corrected. Helmsman, take us in, full impulse. The battle that followed was not a graceful dance of starfighters. It was a brawl. The Crimson dreadnoughts slammed into the Hollow Ones, firing massive depleted uranium slugs the size of skyscrapers. The impact shattered the dark geometry, causing the entities to fracture and scream in bursts of static. The Nova ships wove intricate webs of hard light, creating barriers to funnel the enemy into the Crimson's kill zones. And in the center, the human fleet, smaller, faster, more adaptable, swarmed like angry wasps, targeting the joints, the weak points, the connecting tendrils. The Solstice horizon took a beating. A tendril of dark energy lashed out, slicing through the starboard shields and carving a gouge in the hull. Atmosphere vented. Klaxons screamed, but Thorne held the course. Closer, he yelled over the din. We need to be within 10,000 kilometers of the photosphere. Shields are at critical. Redirect power from life support. We don't need heat where we're going. They broke through the enemy line, the heat of the dying star filling the view screen. It was a terrifying, turbulent ocean of brown and red fire. Deploy the resonance probes, Thorne ordered. 6 torpedo-like devices shot from the Solstice's tubes, plunging into the star. They weren't bombs. They were sonic emitters, designed to broadcast the song of the fungal intelligence, the frequency of life itself, into the heart of the dying star. Probes away, detonation in 3, 2, 1. The star shuddered. For a moment it seemed to contract, shrinking in on itself. Then, with a violence that blinded the sensors, it exhaled. A wave of golden fire, pure and harmonic, erupted from the surface. It wasn't just heat. It was data, it was sound, it was a cosmic shout of defiance. The wave washed over the Solstice horizon, the shields flaring brilliant white but holding. It hit the Hollow Ones. The effect was instantaneous. The dark entities, creatures of silence and void, could not withstand the sheer density of existence contained in the flare. They vibrated, cracked, and then dissolved, evaporating like mist in the morning sun. The star, freed from the parasitic drain, began to brighten, its color shifting from brown to a healthy, angry orange. Target destroyed, the tactical officer whispered, unable to believe the readings. They're gone, the local cluster is clear. Thorne slumped in his chair, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. He looked around the bridge. Sparks showered from the ceiling, smoke hung in the air, but his crew was alive. He looked at the view screen. The fleet was battered, ships drifting, fires burning, but they were there. Crimson and Nova, side by side, bathed in the light of a star that humanity had saved. Captain, Vance said softly, incoming transmission from everyone. The screen split into hundreds of feeds. Alien captains, warlords, judges, all cheering in their own languages. Some roared, some sang, some flashed colors, but the message was the same. They aren't calling us mercenaries anymore, Vance noted. No, Thorne said, watching the star burn. I suppose not. Weeks later, back at the Grand Chamber, the atmosphere was different. The lighting was warmer. The void floor had been replaced by a holographic projection of the restored Verdant system. The seats of the Crimson Warlord and the Nova Judge were still elevated, but a third seat had been added. It was not a throne. It was a simple, functional chair, placed at an equal height, made of steel and oak. Thorne stood before it, feeling uncomfortable in the dress uniform that now bore the insignias of both the Crimson Synod and the Nova Judges, the highest honors they could bestow. The Council of Three is in session, Vrexel announced. his voice lacking its usual coldness. We are here to discuss the reconstruction of the rim sectors and the integration of human shielding technology into the Concordance fleet. We also need to discuss the new protocols for planetary assessment, Kalen added. The Thorn Doctrine. No firing until the target has been scanned for sentient resonance. It slows down the conquest, but the results are acceptable. Thorn sat down, placing his cane against the armrest. He looked at the two ancient beings, then out at the gallery, where thousands of species were watching. He thought of the fungal mind deep in the earth, singing to the stars. He thought of the solstice horizon in Drydock, being repaired not just by human hands, but by crimson welders and nova architects. Acceptable, Thorn agreed. But we have a lot of work to do. The hollow ones were just the scouts. The dark is deep, and we have a lot of lights to turn on. He opened a file on the datapad in front of him. Agenda Item 1, the establishment of the Joint Academy for Interspecies Ethics and Engineering. I have a curriculum prepared. It starts with a poem. Kalen groaned, his head sinking into his hands. More poetry, human. It's about resilience, Warlord, Thorn said, a twinkle in his eye. I think you'll like it. It involves a lot of smashing against rocks. Vrexel's lights pulsed with what might have been a laugh. Proceed, Counselor Thorn. And in the hall of the binary concordance, now a trinity, the human began to read. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with the quiet, terrifying power of a species that had looked into the abyss, refused to blink, and taught the galaxy that even the smallest candle can defy the dark. The warship that rebelled had become the flagship of a new dawn, and the judges of Crimson and Nova sat in silence, learning the law of the gray. That life, no matter how small, is the only thing worth fighting for.